During the Great Depression and the decades that followed, soup wasn't just food. It was survival, stretched thin with water and hope. Today, we're exploring 25 humble soups that kept our grandparents alive through the hardest times in American history. Let's start with potato soup. This wasn't the loaded potato soup we know today, with bacon, cheese, and sour cream. Depression-era potato soup was simplicity itself: boiled potatoes, onions, and milk if you were lucky enough to have it. Families would peel and dice whatever potatoes they had, often the small, sprouted ones that couldn't be sold at market. The potatoes went into a pot with water, maybe a tablespoon of butter or lard if times weren't too tight, and an onion chopped fine to stretch the flavor. Some families added flour to thicken it, creating what they called potato gravy soup. The milk was often powdered, mixed with water to make it go further. A pot that cost maybe 15 cents to make in 1935, about $3.50 today, could feed 6 people for 2 days. Mothers would save the potato water from regular cooking to use as the base, wasting nothing. Salt and pepper were the only seasonings, though some families grew herbs in window boxes for variety. The soup was served with day-old bread when available, soaked right into the bowl to make it more filling. Today's restaurant potato soup might cost $12 a bowl, but back then, this simple version kept entire neighborhoods alive. Cabbage soup. Cabbage became the vegetable of survival during hard times, costing just 2 cents a pound in 1933. Families would buy the outer leaves that grocers usually threw away for even less. The soup was nothing fancy. Shredded cabbage simmered in water with salt and whatever fat was available. Some added a splash of vinegar from the pickle jar to give it tang. The beauty of cabbage soup was that one head could make a massive pot. Immigrant families from Eastern Europe already knew this soup as kapuzniak, but during the Depression, it crossed all cultural lines. The longer it cooked, the sweeter it became, transforming tough outer leaves into something almost delicate. Families would start it in the morning on the back of the wood stove, letting it simmer all day. By evening, the whole house smelled like comfort. Some added a ham bone if they had one, but most made do with a spoonful of bacon grease. The leftover soup was even better the next day when the flavors had melded. Children who grew up on this soup often couldn't eat cabbage as adults. The smell brought back too many memories of hard times. Yet it provided crucial vitamins when fresh vegetables were luxuries most couldn't afford. Navy bean soup. Before food stamps and welfare, there was navy bean soup, the backbone of American survival food. A pound of dried navy beans cost 5 cents in 1934 and could feed a family for 3 days. The traditional version required a ham bone, but during the Depression, families made do with whatever they had. Some used salt pork rinds, others just salt and pepper. The beans soaked overnight in water, swelling to twice their size. In the morning, they went into the pot with fresh water, an onion, and if you were fortunate, a carrot or two. The soup cooked for hours, the beans breaking down into a creamy, thick consistency. Government surplus programs often distributed navy beans, making this soup a staple in both rural and urban areas. Churches and soup kitchens could make enormous batches cheaply. The protein from the beans was essential when meat was scarce. Mothers would mash some beans against the pot side to thicken the soup without flour. Children carried it to school in mason jars, wrapped in newspaper to keep warm. The phrase "full of beans" came from this era, when beans meant energy and survival. Veterans today still remember the smell of navy bean soup as the scent of resilience. Vegetable peel soup. Nothing illustrated Depression-era ingenuity like vegetable peel soup. Carrot tops, potato peels, onion ends, celery leaves. Anything that would be garbage today became soup stock. Families kept a soup bucket on the back of the stove, adding vegetable scraps throughout the week. When the bucket was full, everything went into a pot with water and salt. The result wasn't pretty, but it was nutritious. Potato peels provided potassium, carrot tops offered vitamin A, and onion skins added flavor and color. Some families called it garbage soup, though never in front of the children. The key was cooking it long and slow, breaking down the tough fibers. Strain it, and you had a clear broth. Leave everything in, and it became a thick, filling meal. Restaurant kitchens made similar stocks, but home cooks took it further, using apple cores, corn cobs, even melon rinds. This practice wasn't about being ecological, it was about survival. Every calorie mattered. The soup often tasted different each time, depending on the week's scraps. Children who complained about the murky appearance were reminded that beggars couldn't be choosers. Today's zero-waste cooking movement celebrates what our grandparents did from necessity: corn chowder. When corn was 10 cents a dozen in summer, families preserved it every way possible, but corn chowder stretched it furthest. Fresh corn kernels, or canned when fresh wasn't available, combined with milk and potatoes to create something almost luxurious. The corn silk and cobs went into the pot first, boiled to extract every bit of corn flavor, then strained out. Diced potatoes and onions followed, cooking until tender. The corn kernels came last, along with milk thickened with flour or cornstarch. A tablespoon of butter, when available, made it rich. Some families added salt pork or bacon, but many made do without. The sweetness of corn made children think it was special, not survival food. In farming communities, families gleaned fields after harvest, gathering corn left behind. These gleaning rites fed thousands. The chowder was served with crackers when possible, crumbled right into the bowl. Leftover chowder was fried into corn cakes for breakfast. During the Depression, Campbell's sold canned corn chowder for 8 cents, but most families couldn't spare even that. The homemade version cost perhaps 3 cents per serving. Today's restaurant corn chowders, loaded with cream and bacon, would seem unrecognizable to those who survived on the simple original: split pea soup. Split peas were cheap, dried well, and didn't need soaking. Perfect Depression food. At 4 cents a pound in 1935, they provided protein and filled bellies. The classic version used a ham bone, but families learned to make it with just onions and whatever fat they had. The peas broke down completely when cooked, creating a thick, naturally creamy soup without dairy. Mothers discovered that adding a teaspoon of sugar enhanced the peas' natural sweetness, making children more likely to eat it. The soup was so thick when cold that you could slice it, leading to the saying, "thick as pea soup." Some families added carrots or potatoes when available, but the basic version was just peas, water, and onion. It cooked itself on the back of the stove, requiring only occasional stirring. Leftover soup was spread on bread like pâté. Swedish and German immigrants already knew this soup as Ärtsoppa or Erbsensuppe, and they taught their neighbors during hard times. Churches made massive pots for Friday night suppers, serving it with brown bread. The color wasn't appetizing, a murky green-brown, but the nutrition was undeniable. Even today, split pea soup remains one of the cheapest proteins available. Tomato soup. When Campbell's tomato soup cost 10 cents, and that was too much, families made their own from canned tomatoes that cost half as much. The base was simple: canned tomatoes crushed by hand, water, and a bit of flour mixed with cold water to prevent lumps. A pinch of baking soda cut the acidity and prevented the milk from curdling if you added it. Sugar helped too, just a teaspoon to balance the flavors. The soup was served with grilled cheese when possible, but usually just bread for dipping. Some families added rice or macaroni to make it more substantial. During summer, families canned their own tomatoes, putting up dozens of jars for winter soup. The empty cans became toys, telephones, and planters. Nothing was wasted. School lunch programs often served tomato soup because it was cheap, nutritious, and most children would eat it. Ketchup soup was the even cheaper version, hot water mixed with ketchup packets saved from diners. Veterans remember sea-ration tomato soup that tasted like tin but filled the belly. The homemade version simmered with love and onions, was infinitely better. Today's artisanal tomato bisques with basil and cream would cost a week's Depression-era food budget. Lentil soup. Lentils were immigrant food before they were Depression food, but hard times made them mainstream American. At 3 cents a pound, they offered complete protein when combined with bread. Unlike other dried legumes, lentils cooked quickly, just 30 minutes, saving precious fuel. The basic recipe was lentils, water, onion, and garlic if you had it. Some families added carrots or celery, but many made do with just onions. The soup was seasoned with whatever was handy: vinegar, leftover pickle juice, or a bay leaf from the tree in the yard. Middle Eastern families added cumin when they could afford it, teaching their neighbors about spices that made simple food special. The soup was so filling that one bowl could sustain a working man until dinner. Children carried it to school in thermos bottles when families could afford them, or in mason jars wrapped in newspaper. Red lentils broke down into a puree, while green ones held their shape. Families used whatever was cheapest. Lentil soup was called poor man's meat, for good reason. Catholic families made it every Friday when meat was forbidden. The protein content rivaled beef at a fraction of the cost. Onion soup. French onion soup in restaurants was for the wealthy, but onion soup at home fed the poor. Onions cost 2 cents a pound and kept for months in cool cellars. The key was patience, slicing onions thin and cooking them slowly until they caramelized, using their natural sugars instead of adding expensive ingredients. A bit of flour stirred into the browned onions created body. Water or vegetable cooking liquid became broth. The fancy version had beef stock, but few could afford it. Day-old bread toasted on the stove and floated on top made it filling. If you had cheese, a small sprinkle on the bread was luxury. But most families ate it plain, savoring the sweet, deep flavor of caramelized onions. The tears from cutting onions were called kitchen crying, and children learned young to help prepare them. Some families added a splash of coffee to deepen the color and flavor, a trick learned from restaurant cooks. The soup improved with age, tasting better on day 2 or 3. Large families made enormous pots on Sunday, eating it throughout the week. The smell of onions cooking became the smell of home for Depression children. Turnip soup. Turnips were animal food to many Americans, but the Depression changed that perception fast. At a penny per pound, they were often the cheapest vegetable at market. Both the root and greens were edible, making them doubly valuable. The soup combined diced turnips with their chopped greens, simmered in water with a ham hock if available, or just bacon drippings if not. The turnip's slight bitterness mellowed with long cooking, becoming almost sweet. Salt, pepper, and a splash of vinegar completed the seasoning. Southern families already knew this combination, but the Depression spread it north. The greens provided iron and vitamins, while the roots offered filling starch. Some families mashed part of the turnips to thicken the soup naturally. Others added potatoes to stretch it further. Children who wouldn't eat turnips any other way would consume bowls of soup, especially with cornbread crumbled in. The soup was often breakfast, eaten before dawn by farmers and factory workers. Leftover turnip soup was mixed with flour and fried as patties. Store owners gave away turnip greens that customers left behind, and smart families collected them for soup. Today, turnips are trendy vegetables, but then they were survival. Chicken neck soup. When whole chickens cost too much, butchers sold necks, backs, and feet for pennies. A pound of chicken necks in 1936 cost 3 cents. These bony pieces had little meat but made rich broth. The necks went into cold water with onion, carrot, and celery if available. After hours of simmering, the bones released their collagen, creating a golden, nourishing broth. Families picked the tiny bits of meat from the bones, tedious work often given to children. The picked meat went back into the strained broth with noodles or rice. Jewish families called it goldene yoich, golden broth, and credited it with healing powers. The feet, once cleaned and peeled, added even more collagen. Some butchers gave feet away free to regular customers. The resulting soup was rich as any, made from whole chickens. Bones were cooked twice, even 3 times, extracting every nutrient. The final cooking produced white soup, thin but still nutritious. Nothing was wasted. Even the softened bones were ground for chicken feed or garden fertilizer. This soup represented the ultimate in frugal cooking, turning literal scraps into nourishment. Barley soup. Pearl barley was the forgotten grain until the Depression reminded everyone of its value. At 2 cents a pound, it expanded tremendously when cooked, making it perfect for stretching soup. The classic version started with a beef bone from the butcher, sometimes free if you were a regular customer. The bone went into water with barley, carrots, onions, and celery. After 3 hours of simmering, the barley was tender and had thickened the soup naturally. The beef bone was removed, any meat picked off, and returned to the pot. Some families added cabbage or turnips, whatever was cheap that week. The soup was so thick when cooled that it could be sliced and fried like scrapple. Barley's mild flavor absorbed whatever seasonings were available. Scottish immigrants made their traditional Scotch broth, teaching neighbors about the grain's versatility. The soup kept for a week without refrigeration in cold weather. Mothers discovered that burned barley, ground fine, made acceptable coffee substitute. Children who grew up on barley soup often couldn't stomach it as adults, the texture too reminiscent of poverty. Yet, nutritionally it was nearly perfect. Protein, fiber, and complex carbohydrates in one affordable package. Bean and bacon soup. This wasn't the bean-loaded version we know today. It was beans with the mere suggestion of bacon. A 1/4 pound of bacon cut into tiny pieces flavored a pot that fed 8 people. The bacon was rendered first, the precious fat saved. The crispy bits were removed and saved for garnish. In the bacon fat, onions were sautéed until golden. Then came the beans, usually Great Northern or Navy, that had soaked overnight. Water, salt, and pepper completed it. The magic was in the smoke flavor that permeated everything. Some families used ham hocks or salt pork instead of bacon. Others saved bacon rinds all week for Sunday's soup. The beans broke down partially, thickening the broth naturally. A splash of vinegar at the end brightened the flavors. Children looked forward to finding the tiny bacon pieces, counting them like treasures. The soup was often breakfast on cold mornings, served with yesterday's biscuits. Rural families added wild onions and garlic found in fields. The saying, "living high on the hog," meant having enough bacon for flavor and eating, not just seasoning. This soup represented hope, the promise that someday there'd be more bacon than beans. Oatmeal soup. Before oatmeal was breakfast, it was dinner, specifically savory oatmeal soup that cost almost nothing to make. Regular oats, not instant, were cooked in water or broth until creamy. Onions fried and a bit of fat added flavor. Some families added milk if they had it, but most didn't. The consistency was like porridge but savory, seasoned with salt and pepper. Scottish families called it brose and had eaten it for centuries. The Depression introduced it to wider America. A cup of oats could make soup for 4 people. The oats provided sustained energy, crucial for physical laborers. Some added vegetables, carrots, turnips, potatoes, whatever was available. The soup was often seasoned with wild herbs, dandelion, plantain, or chickweed. Children who wouldn't eat regular oatmeal would consume bowls of soup, especially with a pat of butter melting on top when times were good. The leftover soup solidified when cold and could be sliced and fried for breakfast. Farmers made huge pots during harvest, feeding work crews cheaply. The soup was so associated with poverty that many families stopped making it the moment circumstances improved, unable to separate the taste from the memories. Dandelion soup. What we spray pesticides on today, our grandparents ate for survival. Dandelion greens were free food, growing in every yard and vacant lot. The best picking was early spring, before the flowers appeared and the leaves turned bitter. Families would fill baskets with greens, washing them multiple times to remove dirt and bugs. The greens were chopped and sautéed with onions and garlic if available. Water or broth was added, along with potatoes to make it filling. Some added white beans for protein. The slight bitterness was balanced with a splash of vinegar or lemon juice when available. Italian families already knew this soup as zuppa di dente di leone, and they taught their neighbors during hard times. The flowers were edible too, added for color and subtle sweetness. Even the roots were used, roasted and ground as coffee substitute. Children were sent to gather dandelions, earning pennies from neighbors who were too proud to be seen picking weeds. The soup was incredibly nutritious, more vitamin A than carrots, more iron than spinach. Today's foraging movement celebrates what Depression families did from necessity. The sight of dandelions still makes some elderly people remember being hungry enough to see food where others saw weeds. Rice soup. When rice was 3 cents a pound, it became the base for countless meals. Rice soup was simplicity itself. Rice cooked in lots of liquid until it broke down into porridge consistency. The liquid might be water, milk, or saved vegetable cooking water. An onion, fried in a teaspoon of fat, provided flavor. Salt and pepper were the only seasonings for most families. The beauty of rice soup was its blandness. It took on whatever flavor you added. A bouillon cube, when affordable, transformed it. A can of tomatoes made it Spanish rice soup. Leftover vegetables made it garden soup. Chinese families added soy sauce and called it congee, serving it for breakfast. The soup was perfect sick food, easy to digest, and comforting. Mothers added sugar and cinnamon for children, making it seem like dessert. The leftover soup was pressed into a pan, chilled, cut into squares, and fried as rice cakes. During the war, when rice became scarce, families remembered this soup as luxury. The consistency could be adjusted with liquid, thin for more servings, thick for more filling. Rice soup represented adaptability, changing with circumstances, but always providing sustenance. Carrot soup. Carrots were 3 cents a pound in 1935, and their natural sweetness made them perfect for soup. Peeled and chopped carrots were boiled until soft, then mashed, or put through a food mill if the family had one. The cooking liquid was added back to create soup consistency. An onion, cooked until soft, added depth. Milk or cream, when available, made it rich, but most families used the starchy cooking water from potatoes instead. The natural sweetness meant children actually liked this soup. Some mothers added a potato for thickness and substance. A pinch of sugar enhanced the carrot's sweetness further. The color was beautiful, bright orange that looked cheerful even in hard times. Carrot tops were saved for vegetable peel soup, wasting nothing. Families with gardens grew carrots specifically for winter soup, storing them in sand and root cellars. The soup was often breakfast for farm children, providing vitamin A for eyes strained by lamplight. Homework. Leftover soup was mixed with flour and eggs to make carrot pancakes. The saying, "carrot and stick," took new meaning. The carrot soup was reward for children who helped with chores. Potato and leek soup. Before Julia Child made it French and fancy, potato and leek soup was poverty food. Leeks grew wild in many areas, free for the foraging. Cultivated leeks were often discarded by grocers when the green parts yellowed. Smart shoppers collected these for soup. The leeks were cleaned meticulously, dirt hid between the layers. Sliced thin, they were sautéed in whatever fat was available until soft and sweet. Potatoes cut into chunks, joined them with water or thin broth. The soup simmered until the potatoes broke down, thickening naturally. Some families put it through a sieve for smoothness, others left it chunky. Salt, pepper, and a bay leaf were typical seasonings. The soup was naturally creamy without dairy, though milk improved it when available. Welsh families called it caul sennin and had eaten it for generations. The green parts of leeks, usually discarded today, were prized for their flavor. The soup kept well without refrigeration in cool weather. Children helped clean leeks, learning patience and thoroughness. The sophisticated vichyssoise served in restaurants was just this humble soup with cream and pretension. Depression families would laugh at paying restaurant prices for what they made from foraged leeks and sprouted potatoes, tomato and rice soup. This combination stretched two cheap ingredients into filling meal. Canned tomatoes cost 5 cents, rice 3 cents a pound. Together, they fed a family. The rice was cooked separately first, then added to heated tomato soup made from canned tomatoes, water, and a pinch of sugar and baking soda to cut acidity. Some families fried the raw rice in a bit of fat first, giving it nutty flavor. Onions, garlic, and celery made it fancy when available. The soup was naturally thick from the starch released by rice. Children called it pink soup and generally liked its mild flavor. A slice of American cheese, melted in when available, made it creamy. Schools served this combination frequently. It was cheap, nutritious, and most students would eat it. Leftover soup was baked with breadcrumb topping as casserole. Italian families added basil and oregano from window gardens. Mexican families added chili powder, calling it sopa de arroz. The soup represented cultural fusion born of necessity. During the war, when tomatoes were rationed, families remembered this soup fondly. The combination provided complete protein when served with bread, important when meat was scarce. Pea and mint soup. Fresh peas were luxury, but dried peas were cheap and mint grew wild everywhere. This British-inspired soup became American through necessity. The peas, fresh in summer, dried in winter, were cooked with onions until tender. Mint, picked from yards and roadsides, was added at the end to preserve its bright flavor. The soup was often pureed by pushing through a sieve, creating elegant texture from humble ingredients. Sugar snap peas, when past their prime and stringy, were thrown in whole. The strings were fished out after cooking. Some families added potatoes for substance. A teaspoon of sugar brought out both pea and mint flavors. The bright green color made it seem special, not desperate. Children were sent to pick mint, learning to identify it by smell. The soup was served cold in summer when ice was available, hot in winter. Leftover soup became base for pea pancakes. Armenian families added yogurt when they had it. Irish families claimed it cured hangovers. The combination seemed exotic to American palates, though both ingredients were practically free. Today's restaurants serve similar soups for $15 a bowl: cabbage and barley soup. This Eastern European combination became American survival food during the Depression. Cabbage at 2 cents a pound and barley at 3 cents created filling, nutritious soup. The cabbage was chopped rough, the barley rinsed and added to boiling water with onions. Some families added carrots for color and sweetness. The soup cooked for hours, the barley expanding and the cabbage melting into sweetness. A ham bone or piece of salt pork added flavor when available. Vinegar or sauerkraut juice brightened it. The soup was so thick when finished that a spoon stood upright. Polish families called it kapustniak z jeczmieniem. Russians called it shchi, but Americans just called it filling. The soup improved with age, flavors melding over days. Large families made cauldrons on Sunday, eating it all week. The combination provided complete nutrition, vitamins from cabbage, complex carbohydrates from barley. Children who wouldn't eat either ingredient separately would consume bowls of soup. The texture was substantial, almost like stew. Leftover soup was formed into patties and fried. The smell of this soup cooking still triggers memories in elderly Eastern Europeans of their first American winters. Bean and vegetable soup. This wasn't recipe as much as method. Whatever beans you had, whatever vegetables were cheap. The base was always beans, soaked overnight and cooked until tender. Then came layers of vegetables, added by cooking time required. Root vegetables first, leafy greens last. The seasoning depended on what was available, salt always, herbs when possible. Some families kept a soup pot going continuously, adding ingredients daily. The flavor developed complexity over time. Monday's ham bone made Tuesday's soup rich. Wednesday's leftover vegetables added variety. By Friday, the soup was thick as stew. Italian families called it minestrone. Portuguese called it caldo verde, but every culture had its version. The soup represented community. Neighbors shared ingredients, trading carrots for onions, beans for potatoes. Church suppers featured enormous pots, each family contributing something. Children learned economy, watching mothers decide what could be spared for soup. The nutrition was perfect: protein from beans, vitamins from vegetables, fiber from both. Leftover soup was inconceivable. The pot was simply replenished. This soup method fed millions during the Depression and created the pattern for today's stone soup community dinners. Egg drop soup. When Chinese restaurants were exotic, families made egg drop soup from necessity. The base was simple: water or thin broth heated to boiling. An egg or two, beaten well, was drizzled in while stirring, creating silky ribbons. Green onions, when available, were sliced thin and added. Salt and pepper were the only seasonings for most families. Some added a drop of soy sauce, bought for pennies in Chinatown or from traveling salesmen. The protein from eggs was crucial when meat was unaffordable. The soup was ready in minutes, important when fuel was expensive. Children loved watching the eggs cook into ribbons, calling it magic soup. Some families added rice or noodles for substance. Cornstarch mixed with water thickened it when heartier soup was needed. The technique was taught by Chinese neighbors to anyone interested. During the war, when eggs were rationed, families remembered this soup as luxury. One egg could make soup for 4 people. The simplicity was its beauty: no chopping, no long cooking, just hot broth and eggs. Today's restaurant versions with wontons and vegetables would seem impossibly rich to Depression cooks who made do with eggs and onions. Bread soup. Stale bread was never thrown away, it became soup. Every culture had its version. The Portuguese called it acorda, Italians ribollita, but Americans just called it bread soup. Stale bread was soaked in water or broth until soft. Onions and garlic were sautéed in whatever fat was available. The bread was added and cooked until it broke down into porridge consistency. Some added tomatoes, others just salt and pepper. The result was filling and comforting. Day-old bread from bakeries cost pennies or was given free at closing time. Families timed their shopping for these moments. The soup was often breakfast, especially in winter. Children dunked fresh bread in bread soup, not seeing the irony. Some mothers added sugar and cinnamon, making dessert soup. Others added cheese rinds saved for weeks. The texture varied from smooth to chunky, depending on preference and available tools. An egg stirred in at the end added richness and protein. The soup represented ultimate frugality, making food from what others considered waste. Restaurants now serve versions of this soup for premium prices, calling it rustic or artisanal. Depression survivors would shake their heads at paying for bread soup, cornmeal soup. In the South it was called mush, in the North it was cornmeal porridge, but made thin it was soup that cost almost nothing. Cornmeal was whisked into boiling water or milk to prevent lumps. Salt and a bit of fat, butter, lard, or bacon drippings were added. The longer it cooked, the creamier it became. Some families added onions fried crispy for texture. Others stirred in cheese when they had it. The soup was served with crackers or cornbread for dunking. Children ate it with molasses swirled in. The leftover soup was poured into pans, cooled until firm, then sliced and fried as cornmeal mush. Native Americans had made similar soups for centuries, teaching settlers during hard times. The corn flavor was comforting and familiar. During the Depression, cornmeal was often distributed by government programs. Families learned dozens of ways to prepare it. The soup was filling and provided energy for hard labor. Italian families made polenta soup, adding tomatoes and basil. Mexican families made atole, sweetening it with sugar and cinnamon. The versatility of cornmeal soup made it universal poverty food. Today's polenta served in upscale restaurants is the same cornmeal soup our grandparents ate for survival, just with better marketing. Thanks for joining us on this trip down memory lane. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe.